Don't do that. Yeah, I know because my nephew kept going.
I don't know. They just locked here in the house.
Oh, so why is it?
Uncle Chris,
Because he stole my glasses. He just stole anything else.
Mom,
But he stole my glasses.
where's Dad? Where's Dad? Why I had Katie's mom? And I was like, shut up.
My leg is dying.
I don't know what to do.
I don't even.
Okay, just realize something. Yeah.
So, I was like my parents, and then like everybody.
Hey there. How's it going?
All right, Braden, welcome.
Good to be here.
Sorry, let me try to angle this up a little bit so you're not looking at my feet. There we go. All right, so everybody, this is Braden.
Hello, Braden.
Hello. Braden, these are my advanced theater students.
Great.
And we're glad to have you as our third guest of the year on Interviewsday and our first technical theater expert. So we're very excited about that. So Braden, first tell us where are you currently now, and tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got there.
Awesome. Well, I currently live in Rexburg, Idaho. I work for BYU Idaho as their lighting designer. I grew up not too far from here or there in Brigham City, Utah. Kind of traveled all over as a freelance designer and settled down to BYU Idaho for now. Let's see, I went to school. I kind of went all over. I started at SUU in Cedar City. I did a semester at the University of Utah. Went to Western Wyoming Community College and then finished at Utah State. So I kind of bounced all over the place. And then, like I said, I was a freelance designer. I kind of bounced all over the country doing stuff. I still do a little bit of that, but most of my focus is here at BYU Idaho. Being in Idaho, there's not a whole lot going on, so the university tries to bring in lots of shows and things. So I get to work with the artists that come in and do that. Yeah. Beyond that, I'm mostly a lighting designer. I have done sound design as well. I worked as an audio engineer for a number of years with Utah Festival Opera. Yeah, but I'd say lighting's probably my passion. So since you're advanced theater students, you understand what a technical rehearsal is. And how crazy those can be. I spend most of my life in those. BYU Idaho produces usually between 200 and 300 events a year. And those range from a talking head at a podium to a full-blown musical or a concert, something like that. Also, along with lighting design, I do a lot of systems design. So I design the equipment that goes into a venue so that a lighting designer can then use it. So I kind of do both sides, which is good for me because it uses the left side of my brain and the right side of my brain. I get to switch off. I don't go too crazy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's a little spiel about me. What else would you kind of like me to get into? I can get into my process for things, or, you know, kind of let me know.
Let's start with what a lighting designer actually does. So
Sure.
A lot of our students who may not have the technical background, what does it look like? Is it a day in the life of a lighting designer?
Great. So typically what will happen is I will get, well, originally I'll get contacted by a show or someone producing a show, and they will, you know, that they've looked at some lighting designers. Usually this industry works by word of mouth. I have interviewed for 2 jobs ever in my life. I've done 3,000 shows. So it's not the traditional HR process that you go through when you interview for a job. But the nice thing about it being a lighting designer is you can kind of pick and choose your clientele. As you become more successful and more known, you can say, okay, I want to do this show. I don't have time to do all of these shows, so I'm going to pick the ones I want. That's the ideal place to be. So the whole process starts when I receive a script. So I'll get a script, read through it, kind of put my ideas in. We'll go through a production meeting process for a show, usually once a week or so, and that can be anywhere across the country, a lot of Zoom meetings like this one. So that we'll talk with the fellow designers, talk about how we see the show, what the director's vision is, lots of communication. But the script is the backbone, so everything always comes back to the script. So actually I have here, if I can get my screen sharing to work, give me half a second. A couple of years ago, I did a show in New York called Deep Love, which is, they call it a rock opera, which was a really fun project. So I thought I would bring that one along here. Just give me 1 second. So let me show you what a script typically looks like. I mean, you've seen scripts, but let me show you what I do to them. So we have a script here. This is how I started off. And so this show, you can see, basically I went through, this is my first process through the script. I says, okay, I need cues here. After I've kind of designed how the show is gonna look, I'm gonna decide where do the lights change. So you'll see the red numbers. Like I say, this is preliminary. This show ended up with over 300 lighting cues in it, but you're seeing it's in its form of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you see that number 6 there. There's a light cue there. Now, by the time the show was done, there might be 30 light cues between these numbers, but this is where it all started from. But you've all seen scripts before, so you can kind of see the familiar side, and then you'll see also, oops, sorry, 1 sec. Sorry, my computer's being a little bit slow. Maybe I'll skip this. Let's do this. There we go. So you can see down the side, this is the result of our production meetings. Really just simple notes, how it all starts, ideas down the sides. You kind of see, this is what the director and I talked about. This is kind of shorthand lighting designer stuff. Everybody does their own thing. There's no set format for how that's done. But what that eventually turns into is a light plot. Some of you may have seen something like this before, but what we have here is kind of a bird's eye view of the theater. So this is where I go next in my process, is I'll start drawing this out. Usually the venue will send me a drawing of the theater. You can see the seats and where the stage is. Zoom back, you can see where the lighting catwalks are, all that good stuff. But I start drawing all these symbols on here to say, okay, this is where I want the lights. At this point, I kind of know what I want them to do, but this is the technical side of, okay, this is where they need to go, this is how they need to be hooked up, all that kind of stuff. Also, part of that is understanding the shape of the theater from the side, so we know how far we're throwing the lights. And then this comes down to lots of numbers. So lighting design is kind of, like I said, it's a both sides of the brain kind of thing. Did the creative side first, going through the script, you know, kind of sketching ideas out, and now it comes all down to numbers. And this is what we use to control the lighting with. I won't get too far into that, but this is the mashing the buttons at the light board process that happens from here on out. Just a little screenshot here of this is what typically, I drew this on the plane on my way to the theater to say, okay, I need these buttons to do this so I can quickly program the show. The trick with doing shows professionally, and especially in New York, is that they typically don't rehearse in the space. So, and you know, in college and in a lot of community theater, obviously high school, you get to rehearse in your theater. Whereas professionally, they rehearse in a studio downtown somewhere, and then they will get into the theater usually a week or two before the show opens. With this particular show, it was a festival. So we had 6 hours to tech the show. That included costumes, props, sets, lights, sound, the whole thing. So we started tech at 8 o'clock in the morning, worked all the way through, opened at 8 at night, and that was opening night, which was crazy. Basically programmed 300 lighting cues in that much time. It's very, very fast. But the key to anything in theater is communication, as you probably know. So as we communicated and made our ideas known, that all came together really well. But so I can show you the final product. Scroll down here. This is just a page out of my portfolio. 1 second. Get the cover photo first here. So this is kind of this show here where it says Deep Love. That's where we ended up. And so all of that technical stuff boils down to basically painting the actors on stage in the set to create the world that the show lives in. That's the ultimate goal of any designer, whether it be lighting, sound, set, costumes, props, otherwise, is to create this world on stage. obviously in harmony with the vision of the director. So this show, just to give you a little bit of background, this guy died tragically and his wife is still mourning his death. And so he comes back to kind of haunt her and ends up being very jealous and won't let her remarry. So it becomes this love triangle like most shows become. It's kind of a mashup of Into the Woods and The Phantom of the Opera. That makes sense. So everything you see here, the thing about lighting design is if you can see it, a lighting designer did something with it. Because otherwise we'd all be making sounds in the dark. That's my goal, is to create a realistic world, not just to light up the stage, anybody can do that, but to actually take the audience and transport them somewhere else. That kind of makes sense. That's kind of a lighting design in a nutshell as far as theater stuff goes. Do you have any questions so far? Anything come to mind? I don't want to like bulldoze you, so. Also, part of what I do is I do a lot of music events, so concerts and things. That's a totally different process. As a lighting designer, you kind of need to be able to do all of the different pieces of the industry. Because if you just do theater or you just do concerts, chances are you'll be pretty hard up for money, because there's not a lot of us that do it, and it's pretty short-lived. You know, a production process for me typically takes a month at most, sometimes only a couple of weeks. So there, I'm always working on. I may be working on a theater show this week, but I'm reading the script for the next one. I'm also planning out a light plot for a concert the next week all the time. So there's multiple shows kicking around all the time. As far as concerts go, it's kind of different because you don't have a script. Typically, bands and things don't decide on stage what they're going to do until the doors open. So they'll go through a sound check, check a few songs, and then they'll say, oh, here's the set list. And I may have seen 3 or 4 of those songs, and we just have to wing it from there. It's called busking. That's really a fun part of lighting design. Basically, we hang all the lights, we set it all up so that we can do just about anything we want on stage. And then we go from there and run it live. So it takes a lot of being in tune with music and things like that so that it's not just this boring look on stage for the whole show. I can show you a little bit of what that looks like as well. Let's go back. Here's a show I did for Matt Carney. He's probably more relevant to my time. You may not know who he is. But you can see kind of a very different feel on stage. You know, lots of truss, the lights are just hanging out, we're not hidden. It's all about the music at that point. At this show, we did a 30-minute sound check where he did part of 3 of his songs. Get my page to load. And then the rest of it, we just had to shoot from the hip. So lots of button pushes. It's like playing the piano during a show like this. Really fun though. It's nice to do both sides of what we do. So hopefully you can see in these pictures kind of what the difference that lighting makes. You know, obviously this here with this nice moody blue is going to be very different than some of these other looks. Oops, at the end here. Now obviously that's a very different feel there. You can see that. Really fun. I like to be able to do both, which is why I like being here. Never pictured myself living in Rexburg, Idaho, but I'm not kidding. Along with concerts and things like that is this weird world of dance that lives between the two. I'll get down here to a dance show. Dance is kind of a combination, right? It's not necessarily scripted per se, like theater. It's very similar to theater because it usually has a story to tell of some kind. But it's very obviously musically driven, very little talking usually. You can kind of see here the difference. And all these shows are lit very differently as far as where we put the equipment. Dancers, it's all about the shape of their body visually. So we put lights all over the sides of the stage and on the floor and to be able to sculpt their shape. And in a given show, you'll have totally different, this is all the same performance, all these different photos. Things are wildly different. So yeah, that's kind of the show aspect of things. I really enjoy my job because it's never the same twice, if that makes sense. I like to be able to shake things up and try new things. Also, a lot of what I do, like I mentioned before, I do some side work for a couple of companies. to design lighting systems. And so that can either be a new theater. I worked on the new Hale Center Theater in Salt Lake City, or it can be a renovation project. If you've ever been to Logan, the Ellen Eccles Theater in Logan just got a new lighting system. Worked on that project as well. Very left-sided of the brain. It's very math-driven, that kind of thing. But because I'm also a theatrical designer, I tend to work really well with these venues because they have a lighting designer that designs shows, and they don't want just some engineer coming in saying, well, this is what your system's going to do. They want someone to know. So it's kind of a fun little niche that I didn't imagine myself doing, but it's been really fun to be able to do that as well. I'll just give you a brief view of that. Let's see. Oops. So a lot of it is I draw up a proposal that makes the people that make theater money feel good about themselves. That's why the pretty picture, so that they'll spend the money. But then it comes down to drawings like this. So I won't explain everything that's here, but this is everything from the place you plug the lights in on the wall to the dimmers that power them, to the way that the lighting board itself works with the system, all of that. So like I said, very fun. This is the Ellen Eccles Theater in Logan, kind of a historic space. I don't have any good pictures of it. But it was built in 1923 originally. So it was kind of fun to go back and put a very modern lighting system in a very cool old theater that's full of lots of glamorous, leaf gold and sculpture and that kind of thing. Any questions so far?
Yeah, tell us about some of your favorite, well, theater and concerts. What have been some of your favorite projects you've worked on?
Obviously, Deep Love was a good one. That was my first theater show in New York, which was really fun. Kind of a different kind of show. Also, I've done Joseph about 17 times, but there was one production I did recently of that where they basically gave me free reign. I could do whatever I wanted. They gave me lots of money to be able to buy equipment, and it was a blast. I was also able to help a high school with one of the first performances of The Phantom of the Opera off Broadway, when they first released that for high schools to do, which was a total blast. It took about a year to make that show happen. But it was a very fun experience, very rewarding. The students put their all into that show, so it was fun for me to be with them. A lot of times professionals, they get a little dry, and it's a process, and we do this all every day. And to work with these students, it was a blast. They pull off a very fine performance of it as well. Concert-wise, let's see. Kind of been all over. There's an old band that your teacher and I know called Diamond Rio. You may or may not have heard of them. I did a couple of shows for them. They've been around a long time, but it was fun to be able to be with them for a bit. I traveled with the Piano Guys for the first bit of when they first became the Piano Guys. I was one of their tech guys, so that was really fun on the concert side as well. I think I've done all of the local Utah artists like David Archuleta and Lexi Walker and all those. But yeah. I thought I saw a question there in the front in the yellow.
Yeah. So what was your favorite job that wasn't theatrical?
Oh, that's a good question. Do you mean like the technical, the install stuff, like the system stuff?
Yeah.
Probably that last one I showed you, the Ellen Eccles Theater, because I worked there through college, and so it was fun to come back as later as a professional and come back and say, let's make this what it should be, So.
Yeah. Cool.
Jordan.
What have you found that when you're dealing with stage managers and directors for a theatrical performance, what's your biggest pet peeve when dealing with what's the biggest thing that annoys you when dealing with people like that, and what's the thing that's most helpful for you when dealing with them?
Oh, good questions. Probably the thing that's the hardest is when there's a lack of communication. Especially working with young directors is really great because they have these new fresh ideas that a lot of times have never been thought of before, but a lot of times they're not, they haven't learned the communication skills to really communicate their vision. It's really easy to imagine a show in your head, but then to communicate with that designer that's a skill on its own. So that can be very frustrating. It's also very rewarding because usually they learn. Probably my favorite part is, you know, we as creative people, we come up with ideas, but we can't just all be little dictators on how a show comes out. Usually when we become collaborative with a design team, you know, a directing team, it's like they say, the parts are greater, or the whole is greater than the parts, because you bounce ideas off each other, and it can become more than it ever could have if it was just your ideas. If that makes sense. That's probably the second most rewarding thing for me as a designer, is when that happens. The most rewarding thing for me as a designer is when the curtain goes up and the audience gasps in a good way. That, you know, that it really pulls them into the show. That's my biggest reward as well. And I would say specifically with stage managers, there aren't many bad stage managers in the world, because it's hard to be a stage manager. It's a lot of hard work. I personally think they work the hardest on any show on average. And they really are the glue that makes it happen. So even if you have some team members that maybe are a little naive, or maybe they're not good communicators, the stage manager can make that happen regardless. They're kind of the glue between us all.
Great. Good answer.
Question.
Okay.
What was the most stressful job you've ever had, and why?
The first one that comes to mind is actually the Hale Center Theater. The construction project on that was very behind. I mean, the construction's always behind, but they had already sold tickets for opening night. And so I was in there on Monday, and opening night was Friday, and we still didn't have any electricity to the lighting system yet. In fact, the room where all the equipment was still didn't have a floor. It was still a dirt floor. And so that was probably the most stressed I've been, because usually when I go into one of those jobs, I'm the last guy there. So I'm the one that gets the whip, right? But we still managed to pull it off. They opened on time. There was lots of what I call redneckery in the background, but we made it work. The system was actually finished about 6 months later in its entirety, but they were able to do shows in the meantime.
I don't think, I was like, I don't think you're gonna.
What do you think got you into the technical aspect of theater?
When I was a little kid, I'm one of those nerds that started this really, really young. When I was just 3 and 4, my mom, she was a professional pianist, and so she would play in the pit for shows. And in my family, if you couldn't sit through a rehearsal of a full-length musical, you were set up for adoption. And so I went to rehearsal after rehearsal. That was kind of the process in my family. And I just fell in love with the lights, to be honest. You know, the lights would come up and I would look up at the ceiling, and that is so cool. You know, that was my nerd out moment. I actually was a music major for about 10 minutes, and then switched back because this really was my passion. And so far I haven't been burned out on it. So it's been a good choice. But it did start very, very young. The first show I ever saw was Little Shop of Horrors. Didn't understand anything about it, which is probably a good thing. And but I just loved the effects, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Well, from the other side of the room, Landon.
Is there anything during, say, college or even high school that you would have done differently to help you better prepare for what you work as for today?
I was pretty blessed with my college experience. Like I probably wouldn't change anything about that per se, other than the timing. So it took me almost 10 years to get a bachelor's degree, because I kept getting bored with school and I would go get a job and work shows, and okay, I need to go back and finish my degree. And so I took forever to do that. And I don't know that it was a huge disadvantage, but it would have been a lot easier if I had just finished my program and then went to town. Kind of on that note, I would say that one of the benefits for me was that I went to a small school first. I went to SUU as an intern, but I didn't really start as a freshman until I was at Western. And they're small, and so I was doing stuff in shows my first semester. Whereas some of the bigger schools, you don't do anything with theater until your junior year of college, which you've almost forgotten why you're in college at that point, if that happens. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So now a more technical question.
Sure.
When you first started, I'm assuming based, on how long you've been doing this, the older lighting system versus switching to LEDs and DMX lighting, how is that challenge? And when we have students that are dealing with that same thing, what do you recommend? What's the best approach, and what should they be doing to really master and learn that new system?
Yeah. The lighting technology world didn't change for decades. And my career has kind of been centered on this switch to LED and new digital things. And a lot of where I find myself is working with both worlds at the same time on the same show. So the trick, I would say, overall, is to know how those tools are used, and what the different technology can do, and then to integrate that into your creative idea. So for example, I just did a show where all of the lighting on the stage was basically LED. And the advantage of LED lighting is you can change the color. It does all these different things. They double as strobe lights essentially if you need effects. But then everything in front of the stage that's lighting everyone's faces is incandescent, kind of the old school. So it's plugged into a dimmer and that kind of thing. So what I had to decide was, how is this going to affect my color? I can do all kinds of things with people's hair, with their backlight and the side light coming in, those kinds of things. But I can't do a whole lot with their faces. I basically can pick two colors and I can blend those together, which is kind of the old school way of doing things. Say maybe you have some blue coming in from one angle and you have an amber coming in from the other angle. Between those two, I can either have a night scene, an inside scene that's really warm, or I can have a daylight scene where the two are mixed together. Those are the options. Whereas if those had been LED fixtures, I could do Seussical musical and it would have been fine, color everywhere. And so there is a lot that has come into lighting design that really requires professionals to know the technology side. Traditionally, lighting designers would learn the creative side, and then you had people like master electricians that came in and they know the technology side. But the designers really have to know both now, and I don't think that's going to change. Even as we move away from incandescent lighting, things like that, it's just going to keep changing. I work with some fixtures. In fact, I'm programming a show tonight that I have one lighting fixture that has 87 parameters that I give it, and there are 300 of those fixtures. So that's obviously very technical. The way to overcome that as a designer, to not be overwhelmed, is to have a clear artistic vision, creative vision of what I want to happen on stage, and then kind of removing myself from that and transferring it to the technical side where I mash all the buttons and make it actually happen on stage. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Cool. What else? Other questions? How about those that are actually lighting people?
Go ahead, I saw that one there.
I just had kind of a funnier question that I just like coming back to in my head, but you said you spend a lot of time, like most of your life is just like the technical rehearsals. If that's true, when do you sleep?
Well, us theater people, we don't sleep much. But I kind of on that note, it is very easy to, I guess, take advantage of yourself as your own employer a lot of the time. You have to take care of yourself. And you have to keep in mind that while it is your passion, it's also your job, and you need to have a life balance in there as well. So a lot of times it's turning down shows that I really want to do, but there's no conceivable way I could do it. And also just kind of keeping, a lot of it is planning, just knowing what does my schedule look like, not just for the next day or week, but for the next month or 2 months, what's coming down the pipe. And that helps with the sleep factor. I'd also say it's really easy as a theater major in college to take too many credits. I wish I thought of that with the previous question, but I took 23 credits one semester, and my health has never quite been the same after that. I think if I were to do that now that I'm in my 30s, I'd probably be dead.
So what are some of the college classes that a lighting designer would be taking? What do those look like?
Typically, you kind of have, at most schools, there's kind of a division between the performance side and the technical side. Most of the technical people take a lot of the same classes. So even though I went into lighting design, I still went into architecture, history and styles, I studied costume design, costume history, literature history. I took 3 or 4 Shakespeare classes. I had to take my 2 token acting classes where I was terrible, but it built lots of character. Makeup design is in there as well. Sound reinforcement, sound engineering. Script analysis is an important one. I think a lot of people credit that with the acting side, but it is just as important to be able to analyze a script as a designer. And then some electives as well. Because I'm kind of a nerd, I took some electronics engineering classes, which actually turned out to be very beneficial in my career later with some side work. I took some music classes because I at one point was a violinist. So those kind of classes, they add to your skill set, but they also keep you sane, if that makes sense. Honestly, one of my most favorite classes I ever took, hardest class I ever took, was a human genetics class. Just because it was interesting and totally different, and there was nothing about theater in it, but it opened up my mind to other things, which was great. That's the hardest I've ever worked probably in a class, because I hadn't even taken biology in college at that point. So.
Fun.
I would say also there's lots of, as a theater major, regardless of your emphasis or your actual major, there's lots of what they call practicum classes. Those can be rehearsals. Basically, you're getting credit for showing up at rehearsal. They can be building sets. As a technical theater major, I was expected to do all of those things. I sewed costumes, I built sets, I painted sets, glued props together, changed people's clothes and quick changes, all that good stuff, which is important because we have to understand each other's jobs or we can't really help each other out.
Good point. That's really good. Pay attention to that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did sound design for 4 years with lighting design jobs in between there. Sound design isn't my passion, but it pays really well. So I did that for a while with Utah Festival Opera. Had a blast. Lighting is my preferred, but I made it work. So.
What are some upcoming projects that you've got coming that you're excited about?
Kind of a weird, quirky one is in Salt Lake. They are rebuilding the airport, and they hired a architectural lighting designer to come in, and they want to create a basically, if you've ever been to Las Vegas, the old strip called Fremont Street, where it's all enclosed over the top and it's all lit up. They can show video on it. They can do all kinds of effects and things, and they're doing that in the airport, which with moving lights, not just lights that are like pixels on a screen. So that's an upcoming project that's more technical for me because I didn't design it, but I have to make it work. So that's fun. I'm actually guest designing a show up at Western as a guest designer, My Fair Lady, in November. It's up and coming. So you have to go see that one since you're not too far away. And then actually Deep Love is going on tour this year as well. So I'll be doing part of one leg of their tour with them to get them going and then hand it off to somebody else.
Well, if you find some time, we'd love to have you stop by our school. You could come. We're doing Newsies in November.
Oh, perfect. Oh, yeah. I love that show, so it'd be great.
We'd love to let the students meet you in person and come check out our space and maybe give us a couple tips.
For sure.
We appreciate it.
I'd love to.
Awesome. Any other last words of advice, encouragement, inspiration?
I would say whether you're going into theater professionally or not, theater is one of the most rewarding things you can ever do with your life or with part of your life. So even if a career in theater doesn't pan out, don't ever abandon it. You will change people's lives working in theater. So.
Awesome. Great. Braden, thanks so much for being our guest today, man. We really appreciate it. That's
my pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Okay, everybody, round of applause. All right. Have a wonderful day, sir. We appreciate all you do, and we look forward to seeing My Fair Lady.
So you as well. Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you.
Bye.
Thank you.